A degree for Boardman, a bid for Brother Board, and a board full of weasels. I'm David Hood of the Diplomacy Broadcast Network, and this is Deadline, DBN's monthly news program. Dateline, October 2023. For our feature story, before there was anything like you are watching right now, before there was a video or virtual hobby, we had the written diplomacy word. Articles, books, magazines, and letters were the media of diplomacy expression back in the day. And these forms of content are still very vibrant in today's hobby. Whether you are looking for strategy and tactics advice, a convention or tournament report, or diplomacy-inspired fiction, you can find it in today's hobby publications. Later in the program, we will hear from hobbyists involved not only in the production and publication of diplomacy literature, but we'll also discuss the Diplomacy Literati of the Year award to be given out this coming January. And we'll highlight a few writers who may be in the running for that award as this 2023 writing season enters its final chapters. But first, a look at headlines from around the world of diplomacy. Leading off this month is a piece not just of hobby history, but of American history, and probably a story which many diplomacy fans do not know. John Boardman was one of the founders of our hobby, starting the very first regular diplomacy zine back in May 1963. His Graustark zine became the yardstick by which all other zines thereafter would be measured. And of course, for decades in our hobby, each postal or email game of diplomacy received a Boardman number, so that all the game starts and finishes could be recorded. Dr. Boardman retired from Brooklyn College years ago as a professor of physics and is now 91 years old. This man, so important to us in our hobby, was a PhD student back in 1956 at Florida State, when that December, he invited 3 black students from Florida A&M to the FSU campus for a Christmas event, a move which he knew would be controversial in segregated Florida. It was, in fact, against university policy, so he was consequently expelled from Florida State in a move which garnered international publicity. Dr. Boardman is now being considered, as of this broadcast, for an honorary doctorate from that same Florida State University as partial amends for this past injustice. Linked below is a fuller version of this amazing story. The 17th annual Weasel Moot Tournament, hosted by the Windy City Weasels Club in Chicago, was held the last weekend of September. DBN's own Adam Silverman of California, frequent analyst on our league night and game day live broadcasts, took top honors, followed by other DBN personalities, Saren Kwok of the UK in second, and Zachary Moore taking third. Both Kwok and Moore are past winners of Weasel Moot. And of course, Silverman won the North American Championship, the DipCon, back in 2021 at Carnage in Vermont. Full coverage of this year's event was broadcast right here on DBN. So the link is provided below in the show notes in case you didn't see it on game day. Ably run by Sabia Huja, Weasel Moot boasted attendees this year from far and wide and included both grizzled tournament veterans as well as players attending their very first face-to-face event. Let's cut now to an interview with one of those first-timers, Indiana's Cody Green. Please note that we had an audio issue during the interview, so you'll just want to turn your volume up a little for the interview and then turn it back down unless you actually want me to yell at you for the next few headlines when you get back. Cody Green, welcome to the Diplomacy Broadcast Network's coverage of Weasel Moot.
Oh, how you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. Tell us a little bit about where you're from, and is this your first face-to-face tournament?
I'm from Fort Wayne, and yeah, this is my first time ever coming to something live like this, so it's a completely unique opportunity.
Tell us a little bit about what you were feeling as you went into round 1 of this tournament.
Well, seeing people that I've played with on virtual that I knew were really good face-to-face was very intimidating, but I know I can roll with the big guys, so I just played my heart out and did what I could.
All right, now I was following your play a little bit in rounds 1 and 2. Looks like you had some pretty decent survival type results. Let's talk about those. Round 1, what are your memories from the round 1 game you played?
Well, I went for it, and then well, let's just say I kind of decided to back off a little bit after they attacked me, and I got a little scared. And rather than just keep on pushing and I backed off and let them kind of fight, and then once it looked like it was the right time, we did a draw. I vetoed the draw, and then I decided maybe I'd come back out and try to do it again. Then I got scared, but then I realized afterwards I probably should have never drawed it. I should have vetoed again and went for it.
Which country were you playing in that game?
Turkey.
Okay, and who are when you say they, were people coming after you in that game?
Yeah, I had oh, it's horrible. I can't remember. Well, I had stabbed my only friend, Russia, Chad, and when I did that, he obviously didn't like it, and then caused him to turn around and fight me, which didn't help because I didn't know he had a rebuild. So when I decided to take Rome, he was able to rebuild at Sev and caused a little bit more of a crumbling inside. And people didn't like the idea that I had so many dots in front of me that I could take. So I kind of, I just crumbled. I went from 7 to 5, and then went back up to 6, and then I could have kept going, but I decided not to.
All right, so you took that 6-center survival into round 2, and you played what country in round 2?
Germany.
And tell me about how the negotiations went in that particular game.
Well, Adam played the best of me. He was Russia. I gave him the opportunity to be like, look, I'd really like to be able to work with you. I would like to be in Sweden, and you take Norway, and we fight Matt Krill. And I think I realized after the game ended, it was definitely a ruse to get one of the other stronger players off the board. But I can't down Adam about it, because for the entire game he didn't stab. He kept his word. He won the game, but I should have also kept going in that game, because if I would have decided to turn around and put my units towards Russia, I might have been able to take the board, but I chose not to.
Was any part of your decision there the fact that it was really late at night, you'd been playing all day long that Saturday?
Yes and no. I mean, it was somewhat that. It was more just the intimidation of playing face to face. It was, is it the right choice? Is it not the right choice? Do you keep going? And when you're playing virtual, you've got the screen, which is a lot more, I feel like it's a lot more easier to read the board and knowing what's going on and how people are playing than it is whenever you're playing face to face. You got a lot more interactions and a lot more, the board isn't so it's crisp, but it's not as crisp as the online. So it makes it a little complicated to follow along, but I definitely be back.
That's awesome. All right, let's talk about your round 3 game. We're interviewing you right after you've been eliminated in round 3. They're not going to see this until after the audience sees you being eliminated. Tell us what the game state was at the point of your elimination, so that we'll know as we go forward from an insider's point of view how the game progresses from there.
Well, ironically, it's weird because I died to a GR, the same thing that I got a good game in my last game.
And you were playing England in this round 3 game,
Yeah,
the Walt Disney. It's the Walt Disney game.
Yeah, and I think it just was karma coming back around and biting me in the butt. So I had to tell Matt Krill, hey, I died to a GR, so he could feel a little happy. The game is wild. Germany is pretty much going uncontested. Russia's going uncontested. Nobody on the board can really do anything. Italy had some strengths on the board and attacked France and then backed off. And he was at 7 or 8, and now he's at 4 because he slowly started moving away against them. So I think it's going to be. I think they're going to get a massive four top between Russia and Germany. I don't know who's going to get it, because Germany did right up before I left. Germany had stabbed Russia for Sweden, and
now Russia's being played in that game by Katie Gray. Who's playing Germany?
No, Germany's playing by Steve, and Russia's played as Ian.
Oh, Katie's playing Austria.
Austria.
Okay, right. Okay, so you think it's going to be either one of G or R that ends up topping the game?
Yeah, I mean, I I allowed Russia to walk into my center, so couldn't really do much about it anyways, and I just wanted to end the suffering a little faster so I could get it done. But when I did that, I also decided, well, I'm going to be a little more rude, so I'm going to go ahead and tell Steve, yeah, I'm letting Russia walk in my centers, so, you know, do with that as you will. And, you know, he took that as I better do something because then he's going to be falling behind. It kind of deserves it because it's not that Steve's a bad guy. I think everybody here is a great person, great personalities. He's a little different.
That's a fair comment. All right, two very quick things before we close here. The first is, who's going to win that Walt Disney game? Give us a prediction.
That's a hard one.
I only ask hard questions. I'll give you.
Well, I guess I'll have to give. I kind of hope Ian does, to be honest. He had a really hard, he had a hard beginning when he first started the game, and he kind of moved up due to Craig making a typo.
He made a misorder.
He made a misorder, and after the misorder, he decided to finally go full in on Katie Gray, and that obviously upset her. But yeah, I guess that was just his way of saying, "Well, I messed up. I'm gonna have to change alliances," and went with that.
So you've been describing the wonderful world of Walt Disney, but let's talk at the very last comment for you. There may be people out there watching this who are diplomacy fans. They never made it to a face-to-face tournament before. They don't really know whether they would fit in a face-to-face tournament. This is your first one. Give them an idea of what it was like as your first time to play and enjoy yourself so much.
Well, I think it was great. I mean, everybody here is very, very polite and respectful. They all here to have fun. I mean, it's an intense game for itself, if you know diplomacy, but you would think it'd be a little more hot-headed when people are getting stabbed or things are not turning out right. But to be honest with you, it's not. It really isn't like that. Everybody just takes the game as what it is. You know, we'll get stabbed, you move on, you continue playing, and you have fun. I think if you really want to come and try something different and enjoy being around, I don't know if I can say this, but they like drinking on the job, so it makes it even a little funner to play. So.
All right, Cody Green, thanks for being here on Weasel Newt, and thanks for being on DBN.
Thank you.
Now, if that's not enough tournament coverage for you, let's remember that the 2023 Diplomacy Tournament season is not quite over. The last weekend of October sees the return of the Diplomacy Tournament at Carnage in Killington, Vermont. This site of the 2021 DipCon and 2022 World DipCon is back this year as a regional con, with Tournament Director Dave Maletsky ready to help you make any last-minute trip to his con possible with any travel or housing assistance. Just use the link below to join the Carnage Discord server and then ask for help. Also, the 2023 European DipCon is right around the corner, to be held this year in Paris, France, under the able leadership of Gabriel Leconte. Below is a link to written info about the EDC, which is the last week in November, and also a link to the European Diplomacy Facebook group where you can make contact with the organizers for any registration or travel assistance. The 2024 North American DipCon is also coming up soon. It's going to be held this February in conjunction with the Cascadia tournament in Vancouver, British Columbia. A registration form for that event is also provided below. Clearly, the world cannot get enough of both Andrew Goff personally and the fact that the artificial intelligence agent Andrew worked on, Cicero, actually won an online diplomacy tournament against human competition. Both were featured in a recent issue of Wired magazine, along with DBN's own Siobhan Nolan, as part of a story about the unease with which some view the brave new world of artificial intelligence advancements. One of the best quotes in the article is from Irish diplomacy fan Connor Costick, who wrote in 2015 that, quote, a threshold for determining AI consciousness is whether the program is capable of outwitting humans at diplomacy, end quote. The article also has a pretty good description of the game for the general audience of Wired, and is written by a self-described diplomacy mom. Yes, you heard that right. The kind of mom who facilitates pickup games at her house for her teenage son and his friends. Yes, please. We need more diplomacy moms and diplomacy dads out there. And yes, please, read the article for yourself using the link provided in the description field below. Now, back to tournament news. The Liberty Cup event was played in Philadelphia on October 7th and 8th, with Bill Hackenbracht again serving as tournament director. Kevin Fernandez came in first, with Jason Bennett taking second place. In addition, the creator of Florida Man diplomacy videos on YouTube, Douglas Rentoul, was also playing at the Liberty Cup, which then led him to release a video on his channel a few days later, providing a deep dive into Douglas's first round game as Austria. You can watch the ebb and flow of his red units on that board by using the link to the video provided below. Also, there is another diplomacy event coming to Philadelphia the first weekend of December as part of the general gaming convention called PAX Unplugged. Thomas Haver will be in charge of that diplomacy event. A link to the PAX website can also be found below. Now, let's take a trip around the world of YouTube channels and other diplomacy content creators to report to you on the latest and greatest new diplomacy products from whom we call our DBN media partners. Brother Board has just released a new episode of his podcast called The Diplomacy Dojo. In this edition of the Dojo, he discusses with one of his fellow Gunboat League players how best to fairly allocate power selection in Gunboat, given the inherent imbalance between powers on the board in the absence of diplomacy negotiations. They settled on a bidding system and give you an in-depth discussion of how best to utilize such a system in league play versus one-off or tournament Gunboat games. There is also new content on the Diplomats YouTube channel, as host Ed Sullivan continues his post-game coverage of the top board from the Olympus Discord server for Backstabber players. He interviews winner Bradley Grace and others. Finally, the fine folks at Diplostrats just released a YouTube video examining the growing popularity of Turkish Spring 1901 openings in which Army Smyrna either holds or bounces by moving to Ankara, and also why this counterintuitive move has become the norm in some diplomacy metas. You can find links to all three of these new releases by going down to the show notes listed below. One of the challenges we have when teaching someone to play our game face-to-face is that describing how to play can take away from the time you have set aside to actually play the game. A way to avoid this and to help teach folk remotely how to play would be to use one of these tutorial videos we have on YouTube. Luckily, we've just had a great video resource released by the Game Boy Geek on his channel, entitled, strangely enough, How to Play Diplomacy. In the video, he uses a copy of the new Renegade set to methodically take viewers through the rulebook and to demonstrate the basic concepts of the game using pieces on the board. It's actually quite well done, and also showcases very effectively the new board, the new wooden pieces, and the improved rulebook design in the Renegade version. I encourage you to bookmark this video in case you need to teach the game to newbies in the future. While we're on the subject, I've also linked a couple of other helpful videos you can use to expose new players to other aspects of our hobby, such as relationship management, stabbing, growth strategies, and also how to use Discord in order to participate in the virtual face-to-face method of play. Hey, y'all, it's October. That means the 2023 Diplomacy Broadcast Network Invitational qualifying season is just about over. For the uninitiated, the DBNI was started at the 2020 season as a fun way to tie together all of the results of a particular year's diplomacy events, with the top 28 players in the world for that season being invited to play in a virtual face-to-face tournament in the February of the next year. The standings provided on the DBN website, a link to which is found below, have just been updated after the results of Weaselmoot. While there are still a few other results not yet in the calculation, and there are leagues still playing and some events coming up, we now have a pretty good idea of who's in for some of the coveted 28 spots and who's still on the bubble, hoping to get that invitation to February Fever. As of this broadcast, Saren Kwok leads the field by 1/10 of a point over Michalis Kamarites, while the player at 28th, Cody Green, leads Keith Worstel in 29th by a mere 4 points. Remember, although face-to-face, virtual face-to-face, and online extended deadline events are all included to calculate your DBNI season points, you must have played in at least one virtual face-to-face game during the season in order to qualify for the event. You can meet that requirement through playing a league game like the Tour of Britain or the French Language League or the Virtual Diplomacy League, or you can play in this year's Virtual Diplomacy Championship, the VDC, which will come about later this December. And now, to our feature presentation. Diplomacy articles about the game and hobby have appeared since the hobby began in the 1960s. Whether typed on a manual typewriter for inclusion into a mimeographed paper magazine, like they did back in the 60s, or dictated into a speech-to-text engine for an electronic newsletter, as we might do today, written content enhances our understanding of strategy, tactics, negotiations, conventions, and other aspects of hobby fun. Last year, the idea of a yearly hobby award for exceptional writing was reintroduced to our hobby by the fine folks at the Diplomacy Briefing. Recently, I invited founder Russ Dennis of the Briefing, who lives in Michigan, to our show to discuss the upcoming second annual Literati of the Year award and also to discuss diplomacy writing in general. Russ Dennis, welcome back to Deadline.
Well, thank you. It's always good to be back.
Sure, and it's been a while since you've been on the show. How are things going on your end?
Yeah, I thought you'd forgot about me, David. And I don't know if this is my 4th or 5th time, but it's been about a year. Things are going well. I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So we're definitely busy. But, at the same time, it's always a joy to kind of see the world through the eyes of a kid and just how excited they get about everything. So, that's going well. Diplomacy-wise, I think the last time I played was Worlds in Carnage back in November of last year. But I've continued to be a part off and on there with the Briefing. We've got a good team of editors that, they help turn out those issues. So we are going to be needing some help. I'll just put a little plug in there. We do have some help that some spots I'm needing to refill, substitute in. But, we've got a good team of editors that just do a great job. So diplomacy-wise, I've not been playing a lot of games, but definitely have been staying connected to the hobby in different ways.
Well, that's exactly why you're here, because you are connected to the hobby in a specific way, which regards the literary or the Literati of the Year award that the Diplomacy Briefing newsletter does. Remind our viewers why you and the Briefing team decided to resurrect the idea of a Diplomacy Hobby Award for writing.
So the Briefing just this last week put out their 209th weekly issue. So 4 years ago, when I was starting the Briefing, the basic idea was that, well, yes, we would connect the diplomacy hobby by doing updates on tournaments and new things that were coming out that would be of interest. We would always do one article in every issue. And part of that was because I enjoyed reading articles. That was always something that was an important part of playing diplomacy to me. And so for me, I thought that would get something for people to just open up and check the issues, just because we would be putting something in there. And originally, we didn't do a lot of original content. We would link to other people's content that was putting things out, or maybe have older content and kind of resurrect it a little bit. And after a few months, we started doing a lot of different serials, and champions would be writing and for us that won tournaments. And Now it's all kinds of different things that we have. But what I found was that there was an award that was given for writing from 1984 to about 2004, and it was called the Rod Walker Award. And it rose up in kind of the time of the postal zines, and the hobby would vote on what article in their mind was the best. And so I personally have enjoyed going back and pretty much have connected all the nominating articles and which ones won. I got most of them, and we sometimes do reprint them. But seeing that there was something like that for the hobby, I thought was a neat thing, because people that put time and effort into making our hobby an exciting and fun place should be recognized. So that's why we do the Ambassador Award too. And a lot of organizing and things along these lines can be a thankless task. But for me, since the briefing is about connecting the hobby, I thought it was important that we have an award like this. And so we had kind of thought about maybe continuing it on and calling it the Rod Walker Award. But after talking with a lot of different people about it too, we thought, well, the best thing there is let's let that stand on its own. That was their thing. And so then we started this last year, the Diplomacy Literati Award, to go along with our Ambassador Award. And by the way, it took a long time to figure out what to call it too. But that's whoever wins the award. It's just for diplomacy content, so it's not like research articles or things like that. It's stuff written for the hobby, and you become a diplomacy literati.
And it is actually a wonderful re-addition to the hobby, as far as I'm concerned. Tell us a little bit about the process that you all use to come up with a list of nominees, and then who actually wins the award. Right.
So one of the unique things that the briefing has is it gets a broad look at the whole hobby. And so there's lots of different niches that people have and little sections they have. But because the briefing connects and lets people know when new zines start up, or when a new Diplomacy World comes out, or the tournament articles that come at the end of tournaments. Because we're able to do that, we're able to kind of collate this together. And so we strive, whether it's a blog article about diplomacy or in one of the more published hobby newsletters, we gather all of that together, put it into one spreadsheet. And then I put together a nominating committee from people that, would be interested in those kind of things. And we try to get about 4 or 5 people, and we put forward then about 5 articles, and we have a hobby vote. So we let the hobby know too, by the way, like you need to have subscribed to the briefing to be able to vote. And that way we can make sure that votes are lined up to emails and everything is there on the up and up. So we kind of just put it out to the hobby, and then whoever wins, Matt Krill, he makes them a plaque, a trophy that then the briefing will send to whoever is the winner. And it's a way to, again, just kind of show, hey, this is somebody that did a great job on an article and the hobby appreciates it.
I think that's awesome, except for the fact that last year it was won by Ed Sullivan. So this is your chance to take issue with that, to explain that your process went awry, or to do anything you want to do about the fact that Ed Sullivan won this award last year.
Yeah, this interview was going pretty well up to this point, and you had to bring up that. I think Ed would probably, if he could, get us to rename the award the Ed Sullivan Award, if we would let him. But this is one way the hobby knows that we were honoring every vote, because Ed won. And I should say too, that Ed is an excellent writer, and I always enjoy the articles. So he definitely was well deserving. There were a lot of people that did a great job, but Ed always writes good articles. And so if he's listening to this, continue to write for us.
Oh, he's listening to this for sure. Hoping for someone to mention his name, which, by the way, we just got finished doing. All right, let's step back just a minute. Why do you think diplomacy articles are important? from a hobby perspective?
Yeah, I would say probably the same as why writing is important today. Um, Video content is great and it fulfills a really important niche. But one of the reasons why still people write today and books go out is because it's a chance to sit down and really kind of collect your thoughts and think deeply about something, or be very clever and witty about, a certain aspect in the hobby. And so I think, that that's an important aspect of it. Also, the nice thing there is it's another way to consume diplomacy content. And once you put it up there, it's something that people can go back and read at their convenience. And another thing there too is I think it's just a good way to give back to the hobby. It's something that anybody can do. You don't have to have video equipment or be able to do video editing. If you have some good thoughts that other people would want to read, I should say, it's a way you can give back for all the writing that people have done that I'm sure you consumed. I know at least for me, that was one of the things I really liked about diplomacy when I got in, was all the study and reading I could do from other people that were very good at the game and who had taken time to write down openings or their thoughts for certain powers or power dynamics. Like that was something I really, really enjoyed being able to read about when I first got into the hobby.
Yeah, I remember getting into the hobby, getting a bunch of back issues of Diplomacy World and a few other zines and just devouring them. Not just for information about the game, but information about the hobby and the personalities and the history of it. It was fascinating to me even then. All right. So if you're looking for a good article, what do you yourself look for in a good diplomacy article?
Yeah, so there's two types of articles I personally really enjoy as the briefing founder. I always enjoy like articles that are clever and silly and that kind of come at diplomacy a different way. I like that. And then we started about 2.5 years ago or something, the Second Fiddle series, where we go to the person who got second in the tournament and say, hey, why don't you write and talk about why you didn't win? And I always personally have enjoyed those articles the most. Of course, some may be because I don't seem to get first very often. So maybe I have a special place in my heart for those that get second. But, I think a lot of times it's easier to find ways why perhaps you didn't win than to even know why you did win. So I feel like I can sometimes learn a lot more and they're more fun. And so those are articles that I kind of look at, but, things that are well thought out. It doesn't hurt if you have good grammar, so there doesn't have to be a lot of corrections. But those are things that I think make a good article.
Makes sense. Where do people go nowadays to find diplomacy written content in your view? Where are the places people should go even?
Yeah, if you're talking about like fresh content, things that are coming out, well, Diplomacy World is always a good one that comes out every quarter. There's some new they're webzines are what they are, but they're trying to kind of create the feel of a postal zine with people having a game master and people writing public press and those kind of things. And there's some good ones that are doing work out there. In fact, if you go to some of our past issues, I believe in the last 2 months, we put up some links to some of them that you could go, and if you wanted to play the game that way. And there's also articles that get put on. Of course, the briefing, you're getting 52 articles a year. If you want to read, diplomacybriefing.com, it's free. Though if you want to be a patron, you're more than welcome to. But that would be a great place too. And so for reading content, those are kind of the ones that are still producing content on the regular. But there's obviously a lot of places you can go that perhaps they're not really producing content right now, but they still have a backlog of stuff that are just great to read. When I think about like strategy sections, I think two great ones to go to are the Diplomatic Pouch. which I don't think they produced anything in about 2 years. But I mean, they've got everything going back into the 90s, and there's some really, really good strategy articles. Brother Board, same thing. There's not been, I know he himself hasn't written a lot, but he's got some really great stuff on his blog about thinking about the game. That he's a good one to go and to read. But there's a lot of resources out there to kind of grow your knowledge of the strategy of the game and power dynamics, all of that.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, so I know you're a big fan of hobby history, and we've already talked about this a little bit in this interview, but what role has diplomacy literature played in our hobby and its growth and development, in your view?
Well, I mean, we wouldn't have the hobby today if there wasn't the postal era. If the postal zines in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even going into the 90s, if that had not been a unifying fact of the hobby, I mean, diplomacy would be another ancient game from the 60s. And so the fact that for the diplomacy hobby, that they had a place for people to write and to come together and play games together is why we have a hobby today. So it's obviously incredibly important. But I didn't start playing diplomacy myself until about 2007, 2008. And I know for me, one of the things that really, for me, showed like this is more than just, a game was all the writing that had been done about it. And guys like Manus Hand had put up, a lot of writing there on the diplomatic pouch, or even Stephen Azure, or Ager, I'm probably pronouncing his name wrong, but he put up the diplomacy archive, which was, I know, been huge for so many people, particularly from the online scene, to getting into the hobby and being able to read about all kinds of things. So literature continues to be really, really important for people that get into the hobby even new.
Yeah, that's totally right. All right. Any particular articles that you want to highlight as being memorable from the present or the past?
Yeah. Yeah, when you mentioned you're going to ask me about that, I mean, for me, over these last 4 years, I kind of wanted to look back and see all the different things people had written through the briefing, and man, it was really a fun kind of trip down memory lane. Again, like if you're wanting to do strategy, like the diplomatic archives, diplomatic pouch, and Brother Board have some great stuff about strategy in there. But for me, with editing the briefing, some of my favorite articles are, especially some of like the special issues that we did. And I always really liked collaborating a lot with Zach Moore because I think we have a similar maybe silliness about the hobby. And so I can give
nut. Russ, he is a complete nut.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I come up with the ideas and sometimes he has his own, and we're not running that. But some of them come up with ideas, but he writes it, and he's written. I think one of the first articles he wrote was on why Brian Pravel was secretly setting himself up to be a world champion, and that was in our April Fool's issue, and it was fun. Like this last Halloween issue, we Maxim Popiv wrote a spoof article about diplomacy off of the Telltale Heart, and hearing the beating of the heart and all this stuff, and it was really fun. And we had another article in there talking about how Jack the Ripper was really a diplomacy player all behind. And there's been just a lot of really, really fun stuff that I've enjoyed a lot about the hobby. And obviously these are not articles, but these are in the briefing. But I know some of the spoof songs that we do, and that I should say you do. People don't want to hear me sing, but all of these things are stuff to me that make the diplomacy hobby fresh and fun. And so for me, those are things that I look back and they bring a smile to my face, and it was fun putting those together, but also then just reading the creative stuff that people had written.
Well, I appreciate that trip down memory lane, like you said. And as far as keeping things fun, I think that the briefing is definitely part of the fun of the hobby and has been since you started it. And I wanted to say thank you for that. And also thank you for being back on deadline. It's been too long.
I agree. Thank you also, David, for everything you do, and the people at DBN. You guys definitely have brought a whole new, I would say, outlook to the diplomacy hobby as people look in on that. I mean, it's something when this board game now has its own, regular video content that you guys do, and just how more professional you guys got very quickly once you started DBN. So, but on the side of the briefing, I appreciate the content you provide so we can put things in our issues.
Yeah, it's very complimentary in that way. All right. Thanks, Russ. Following up on the Literati of the Year Award, let's take the temperature of the state of our hobby's 2023 literature to date with two panelists with unique perspectives on that topic. We are joined this month by Texas resident Doug Kent, longtime publisher of Diplomacy World magazine, and by Robert Schuppe of Dresden, Germany, who until recently worked on content for the weekly newsletter, The Diplomacy Briefing. Hey, fellas, thanks for joining us here on this month's discussion for diplomacy hobby writing here on Deadline. First off, Robert, tell us a little bit about how you got into diplomacy, if you would.
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. So when I was a teenager, I was really into board games, also complicated board games with long durations and so on. But I had some trouble finding people to play them with me. My friends were more into like, yeah, 45 minutes, 60 minutes, that's fine, but not the long ones. And one day at a board game store, I bumped into somebody who was there about my age, also a teenager, with a friend, and he was telling that friend, there are all so many great games, all those long strategic games, I love them, but nobody wants to play them with me. And the person he was with looked at him and said, like, in a way, I'm certainly not that person who wants to play those games with you, but I said, like, that kind of sounds like what I'm dealing with, and we teamed up and started playing found a few more guys eventually to play these long, big games with, and he was very much into diplomacy, was playing quite a bit on V-Diplomacy at the time, and said, like, yeah, you should try that out. And I played a few games, really didn't like it in the beginning, played one very weird face-to-face game with 6 players and no Italy, and didn't look at it for years. And then when COVID came in 2021, I thought, like, yeah, what's about that diplomacy game? Poker, chess, all of them have had a big renaissance on the internet during COVID. What's going on there? And that's essentially how I discovered first Diplostrats and then DBN, and then eventually started playing myself again and have been much more into it compared to the first time I tried it.
Well, we're glad that you are now back into it. Why do you think diplomacy writing is important to the hobby, in your view?
I think when we're talking about a hobby compared to just something you do occasionally and that's fun as an activity, but it's just a now and then thing, I think what really makes a hobby, what defines it, is that there are also things around the activity. So in our case, not just playing the game, but also meeting people, but then also having activities that are connected to that particular game in this case. And I think having publications and having dedicated writing about the game, about different aspects of the game, people contributing by writing themselves, people reading publications and so on, I think that is a crucial part of actually having that little nice subculture we all like so much, where you can have discussions and where you have things to do, how you can stay in touch with the hobby when you're not playing, because we all know it's a long game and not everybody has the time or, frankly, wants to play games at all time. So I think that's a very important element to keep the hobby together. And yeah, obviously there are other reasons as well, like, improving your game and so on and so forth. But I think those are obvious. And I think what I just try to point out is to me maybe the more important or more interesting part of the whole thing, of having articles about diplomacy.
Oh, I can see that. Doug, to give us your origin story and then answer that same question about the significance of diplomacy writing.
Well, time frame's a little different, but my story isn't that different from Robert's. I played a lot of Avalon Hill board games when I was a teenager. And because of that, I subscribed to their magazine, The General. And then after I got out of high school and got married, my wife had a lot of health problems, so we weren't exactly social. So I was looking for something to do that I could do by mail. There wasn't an internet at that time. And came across an ad for a diplomacy zine in The General. And that was a game that I hadn't played very often and wasn't really fully familiar with. I tried it once or twice, but never really thought much of it, but saw that it could have some really good remote applications. So I dove in headfirst to postal diplomacy and just went from there. In regards to the written word, I think that, as technology has moved on, the world has become a much more visual place, or at least that's how people consume media, a lot more visual or multimedia. But written articles are still very important, in part because they generate a different kind of interest and a different kind of mental activity. Just like if you're reading a novel and you're building up the story in your mind and the characters take shape in your own mind and you come up with new views of how things are happening versus watching a movie, it's the same with articles. They generate a different kind of thought process and your own ideas and questions in ways that consuming video and multimedia things just don't do. So even with the changes in the hobby, they are still very important, and they do certainly help expand the game from just playing against people across the board into meshing very well with the larger sense of a hobby as a whole that so many of us that have been here for so long appreciate as much as or more than the game itself.
Well, speaking of that long perspective that you have as someone who's been in the hobby now for decades, do you think that either the role of diplomacy writing or the quality of diplomacy writing, either one, has changed over the years?
The role has changed only because, like I said, the advent of the internet and video, like this video. So it's a little bit more of a supportive role than it was as the only outlet for creativity before. Quality is not diminished in terms of the written word. Quantity has certainly changed, but that's because people use their talents and their creativity into other forums. But the quality certainly has not changed.
Well, on that note, let's dive right into a discussion of this year's race for the Literati of the Year award, which is something that the briefing started doing last year. And we will have a discussion in this same episode with Russ Dennis about why that has been going on and why he restarted it. But let's talk about this year. I know we still got several months to go in this calendar year for content creation, but I'd like to hear from each of you about what diplomacy writing you have found particularly memorable this year so far. So, Robert, let's start with you. Tell me what stands out.
That's obviously a very difficult question, and I just wanted to point out a few that are memorable to me. I mean, one is a very boring pick because it's Ed Sullivan again, and I hate to do this. I think he won this award last year, but he wrote an excellent article in the briefing about his win of Armada, the face-to-face tournament. And the thing I really liked about this is that he took a very personal approach, which I always like. It's not just like, yeah, and then I made this move and, the tactics worked out that way. But he talked, or he guided the reader through his process of, going through a time that was a little less successful after having a very stellar time before that, and then getting back to winning a tournament. And that was very interesting to me, a very sort of personal approach. Another approach that I really liked was Michalis Kamaritis actually writing about his tournament win, which, I think David can say a little more about, or could, because it was at his tournament, DixieCon. where he's taking a very strategic and meta tournament approach,
Yes.
which was more to like, okay, I don't want to get a score that is too big in round 1, and then I want to get my really big score in round 2 because round 3 is time limited. And I really love how different people write about different aspects of how to win a tournament, essentially. So those are two that I really enjoyed. And a third one to mention maybe was Saren Kwok, also writing about a victory, in this case a virtual tournament, the Summer Classic, because she took a very creative approach and compiled a playlist for each of the players, or like one song for each of the players she shared the board top with, the top board with. And that was a nice example of like, hey, you know, it can be, you can use lots of different forms to write about diplomacy. It can be fun to explore to how you can connect it to other parts of popular culture or culture in general. So those are three that come to mind when I think about this year and what kind of articles I've enjoyed reading.
Those are all really good choices. The creativity that each of them used. You mentioned Saren's use of the music. That was really, you could tell that she put some real work into writing that article, and that showed. Well, the three that you have mentioned, Robert, are all sort of tournament reports. Is there a type of art diplomacy article that you find as a reader particularly interesting or particularly attractive?
Yes, I suppose so. I mean, my answer from before is telling a story about that. I like to read those. I also like strategy articles or tactics articles where you have a very concrete little thing that you can take out of the article and try yourself in the next game. Whenever you're reading an article and thinking, oh, I want to try that the next time I'm on a board or the next time I draw that particular country or whatever, I think that is always a great sign because it motivates you to play the game, and it is just something applicable when you think, oh, I never thought about that. And you know, one example would be, maybe we have to give a small plug because there is a series upcoming in the briefing about underrated openings. And David, you were so kind to contribute one article about a very humbly named opening as well. And yeah, so these kinds of articles I really like as well. When you think like, oh yeah, no, that's a good idea. I should try that out. I've never done that before.
Yeah, I actually think sometimes when we think, or at least many of us think of the word or the words diplomacy article, we immediately think of a strategy and tactics type article, which is only one subset, but an important subset of what is out there in the literature. Doug, how about from your point of view? What types of articles are your favorites?
I mean, I'm a little bit different. My favorite articles are usually those that have a slightly humorous bent or more of a literary bent, but not exclusively. I also really enjoy articles that talk about the changing patterns within the game itself and the changes in the way people are playing, the way the game has mutated and progressed, and playing strategies move from one thing to another and then back. The pendulum swings the other way. I think it was Chris Kelly wrote an article in Diplomacy World a few issues ago about France meta within the DBNI. And it's that kind of focus on the way different powers have become more or less powerful, or the way people are playing them differently in more recent history, that I sometimes find very interesting because I like to compare it to how I mentally view the countries from my time when I was more active in terms of playing in the hobby, and how those things seem to ebb and flow. I mean, you know, like when I started in the hobby, Italy was the nation you never wanted to get. And now we see people succeeding with Italy all the time in tournament games. In some cases, it's the preferred nation. So, you know, articles like that. Robert mentioned Michaelis. He had a different kind of article talking about his trip out to Whipping and how that came to pass and how unexpected it was for him. That kind of travel log is something that I've always found really enjoyable too.
Yes, and it was a very personal article. And I, just speaking for myself, I often really like articles where you get a good window on the personality or the personal characteristics of the author. You mentioned, Robert, the Ed Sullivan article, and I did roll my eyes at talking about Ed Sullivan yet again. But you're totally right that that article oozed Ed Sullivan out of every word. You got an idea of what Ed is like by reading that article. Doug, any other?
Nobody else could have written that article but Ed.
No, that's totally right. It's only Ed Sullivan could have done that. Doug, do you have any other articles you'd like to mention or that stand out to you in particular, either from Diplomacy World or from some other source?
It's sort of a revisit because it's a changed article, but I just want to mention it for people who enjoy that kind of thing. David Smith rewrote an article that he'd written decades and decades ago called The Double Eagle, which is sort of a diplomatic take on Maltese Falcon and put in the place of a diplomacy tournament. And he rewrote that, changed it around, fixed up some typos that he was still seething over 40 years later. And we put that in the latest Diplomacy World. That was an article that, as much as I enjoyed it when I read it 4 years ago, I enjoyed it even more now because I appreciate the subject matter that much more. And that's the kind of article that always finds a special place in my heart. You know, it's going to be hit and miss for how other people view each article, but that's the kind of article that I really enjoy more than any other.
Yeah, and there's examples of that from long times past in the diplomacy hobby, which I was reminded recently, and you'll hear this during the show. There's a headline about John Boardman, who actually sort of started the diplomacy hobby as we know it in 1963. I went back and looked at that first issue of Graustark, his zine, to see what kind of writing was being done in literally 1963. Even I wasn't born. Even I wasn't born in 1963 when John Boardman started his zine. So this is this is a subject that goes way, way back. But let's end the discussion, or maybe take this discussion on more of a future note. Doug, do you think there are topics which really should be explored more fully by those eager people out there that want to become diplomacy writers? Give us some ideas on topics.
Well, the one topic that I never think gets enough attention in terms of written articles, and I understand why, because just like magicians don't want to reveal their tricks, successful diplomacy players don't want to reveal their tricks. But I always feel that for newer hobbyists and experienced players, a detailed discussion of how negotiation works and how to work your way into getting what you want from other people is the one topic that's not covered enough from those who are most successful. And again, I understand, as I said, I understand why, because why would you want to give people the template of how you're getting to where you want to be? But I always feel that there aren't enough examples of that in detail. We get plenty of articles about pushing the pieces around and looking at the board, you know, mid-game and end-game strategically, but not in terms of clashing personalities and motivations.
Yes, that reminds me of something that happened to me. I think it was literally in the year 2000. There was a Washington Post reporter at a diplomacy tournament that I was at, and she was following me around. And I was explaining to her why I was doing certain things from a physical point of view during the negotiations. So she saw me sit down when I was dealing with somebody that was afraid to work with me. And she saw me sit down and let them look over me as they were standing up, and I was sitting down looking up. And I explained to her after that was very much on purpose because I wanted to be less threatening. And the way to be less threatening is to sit down so that they are now taller than you are by definition. And they're sort of going over you. And if anybody would feel intimidated there, it would be me, not them. I can't remember if that worked, but it's those little tricks that we're talking about. You know, there's a lot of listening that needs to happen instead of talking. And the people that really know what they're doing could explain how to do that better, for example. Robert, how about you? Any topics you can think of that you think diplomacy writers ought to take advantage of in terms of a topic?
I would really enjoy to see more articles about local, regional, national hobby scenes, sort of the sub hobbies there are. Because, I mean, on the internet, in virtual and in extended deadline to an extent, and also in some more old-fashioned publications, people are playing from all over the place together. But there are significant subgroups of the hobby, especially divided by language, but sometimes also just by, location. The Australian hobby is, from all I've heard, quite different to the American one, even though they play the same. They play in the same language, and the British hobby is different once again. And there was a very nice article by Gary Sturley about the British hobby. And I would love to see more people stepping up and saying like, hey, I'm from place X and I will write a little bit about how we play here. You know, what is the kind of social thing we do surrounding our tournaments, our games, and so on? What is the meta we are playing here? You know, how is it maybe different from what I've experienced when I travel to another country to play a tournament there? That is something I would enjoy quite a bit, just from a social point of view, a cultural point of view, but also just to understand more how different it can be to play with players who come into your group and play, but they are usually playing in a completely different hobby. You know, when somebody's traveling, for example, and saying like, usually I'm playing with people in France, but now I'm going to whatever WDC in Asia, in Thailand, where there's a big mix of people from all over the place. And so, yeah, I would love to learn more about how whoever is out there is playing in their local club or with their friends or in their particular league or tournament they have over there. That would be nice.
Any other authors, Robert, that you would like to hear more from, that you would like to throw out their names?
Oh, I don't know. Not quite from the top of my head. I mean, I think the nice thing is that diplomacy is a fairly small hobby, and everybody who wants to be heard can get a voice. I think that is very nice. So I would actually encourage anybody who hasn't written at all, probably. I mean, I enjoy hearing from the Ed Sullivans and Nicolas Taillés and Brendan Fogels of this world. I mean, all of them write wonderful articles, and I'm sure they will continue to do so because they will continue to win 2 or 3 tournaments a year, it seems like, and then they will always get their champion's corner. But no, kidding aside, actually, whoever is playing diplomacy and feels like there's a topic they would like to write something about and they haven't done it yet, or they haven't written an article at all, I would encourage to do that. You know, it's a great way of interacting with the hobby, and everybody's perspective is valuable. You know, it's not just the top tier players who are winning a tournament after another. It can be about something cultural or social, but also the perspective of getting from the very beginner level to an intermediate player is often way more useful to the readers out there than the question of how do you win a world championship after you've won 5 tournaments already. You know, that is not the standard perspective most players take, you know.
Yes, it strikes me that some practical how-to of how to play in your first tournament might be really important.
Yeah,
so, you know, not how to win the tournament, because most people are not going to win a tournament just from a numerical point of view. Yep. So how do you play for more fun? How do you play to improve your game? How do you play to improve your position on particular boards? That seems to me would be a really good subject.
Yep, I agree totally.
Doug, give us a pitch, and by us, not me and Robert, but give us out there in diplomacy land a pitch on why they should write, and then how they could get in touch with you about writing for Diplomacy World in particular.
You should write, whether it's for the briefing, for Diplomacy World, for any publication, because the internet and written word is forever. We're still reading Shakespeare, so some of us are still reading Sanskrit. In 1,000 years, we'll still be reading your diplomacy articles. We may not remember what diplomacy is, but we'll still remember your article. So you can live in immortality through your own written word. But if you're going to write for Diplomacy World, I know that for newcomers, it seems like a step that they're sometimes afraid to make. You just put the words on the page and send it in, and then we work with you. If somebody wanted to write for Diplomacy World, they can find me on Facebook or on Discord. There's links on the website at diplomacyworld.net, or they could just email me at diplomacyworld@yahoo.com.
Let me throw an issue at you that I really didn't prepare either one of you for, but it's come up recently in something that I'm involved with sort of on the sidelines, which is the issue of diversity in our hobby and representation. From my point of view, as a sort of a hobby old timer, we certainly have benefited lately from a lot of important contributions, not just to the game itself, but to the written word that we've gotten from a Saren Kwok or from someone from a diverse background, not somebody just all the people that look like me, for example. How important do you think that is in the hobby, Doug? And what is your perspective on that issue? Again, from another hobby veteran point of view.
It's very important because everybody that comes to the game comes into a game, whether it's, I mean, it's different when it's an anonymous online game and no one knows who anyone is, or an online tournament, or a face-to-face club, or face-to-face tournament. Everyone is different, but everybody comes into the game just as they come into life from a different perspective, a different background, with different skills, different assets, different liabilities. And it's important within the hobby itself to remain as open as possible and as welcoming as possible to everyone, to make sure they understand that they are welcome, and that the more points of view and more experiences we have brought into the hobby, the more diverse and interesting the hobby becomes, especially since those of us who have been in the hobby for a while recognize that it's those personalities and those individuals that you meet and interact with are the largest draw for the hobby, not the game itself. Most of us don't excel to the top, top rated players list. That's not what's kept us in the hobby for so long. Not excelling in play, but enjoying of play and enjoying the personalities. I know that sometimes it can be scary. Also, it can be difficult. I mean, I've had a lot of private conversations with people about orientation, gender, race, and issues they've faced. And a lot of times they're reluctant to write about those because they don't want to deal with the likely perceived backlash from those who don't understand what they're trying to say and want to reject it. But, and that's a personal choice. I don't criticize anyone for not wanting to put things on paper and have them printed and read and responded to. But I'd encourage anyone with different viewpoints to put them out there. Most of the hobby is very welcoming and accepting, and will be there to back them up. And also so that sometimes people don't know what they're doing unless you point it out to them.
Well, that's certainly true. Robert, do you have any thoughts about that subject?
I can only totally agree with Doug, and maybe add one little thing. I think that publications, whether that's writing or something else, are a great way of showing minorities as well, or people from diverse backgrounds that might not be a huge number in the hobby, but just showing that there are people like that as well can be very helpful, I think. Because, I mean, in general, there's nothing wrong with a particular game or particular hobby appealing more to a certain subgroup of people, but it really becomes a problem when they are dominating the hobby that much that people who are not part of that subgroup think, okay, am I welcome? Do I fit in there? Do I belong? Am I allowed to be there? I think that is an issue. And I think by having articles or videos or whatever by people who might be in some sort of a minority in that particular hobby, you show the world out there, yeah, even if there might not be that many people of that particular whatever, whether it's ethnic background, gender, professional background, whatever you name it, you still see, okay, it's still absolutely possible. Everybody is welcome. And just because the first game you walk to might be just 7 white guys of a similar age group and all of them are being lawyers or software developers, doesn't mean that this is all there is, and especially not all that is acceptable or welcome in the hobby. And so I think that is how a worldwide publication can be very helpful to motivate people who are thinking about, yeah, I've been playing this game a little bit, maybe I go to a tournament or I become a little more involved, but I don't know about the people, by showing them, hey, there are other people like you out there as well, and you're not alone. And I think that is an important message. So yeah, absolutely. Everybody who wants to participate and who has maybe a background that is a little different than the average, absolutely go for it. I think it's a great thing.
I appreciate those comments very much. Any final thoughts you want to give our audience, Robert, about this issue of diplomacy literature, diplomacy writing?
I think the summary of what I try to say in these answers mainly is that it's all about, connection and communication. After all, we as a hobby define ourselves by playing a game that is highly communicative, that is very much about, interaction. And also that's what a hobby is about. interacting. I mean, Doug also said that earlier already. It's so much about the people. So use the possibilities that are out there, whether that's contributing an article yourself every now and then, or just reading articles out there to, you know, get different perspectives or stay on top of what's happening. I mean, every one of us will, you know, miss the majority of events and tournaments happening out there by definition. That's just how it is. But it's nice to get a sense of what people are doing and reading, oh, you know, that person won or whatever. This person got really close and this is really annoyed by having a second place. I played with that person lately myself or something. So yeah, interact, engage, and I think that is very important for our hobby and the game itself.
Yeah, thanks for that, Robert. Doug, any final thoughts from you?
Just that all these publications, whether it's online, quarterly, monthly, any publication that publishes for diplomacy is only as good as the articles that it receives. So while I wouldn't say that everyone needs to write an article for something, I would say everybody who has a consonant in their name should attempt to write at least one article.
I appreciate you limiting your scope to just those consonant people. I think that's helpful. All right, guys, thanks so much for being on the show, and thanks for all you've done in the hobby up to now.
Thank you, David.
Thanks, David.
And thanks to all of you watching at home. We hope you have enjoyed this broadcast of Deadline. If you have news, ideas for features, or feedback of any kind, please feel free to send an email to info@diplobn.com, or you can drop me a line directly using davidhood@dixiecon.com. To review all of our broadcast offerings, visit our website at www.diplobn.com. This is David Hood signing off. I wish you brightness and bliss and, of course, Belgium.